Good morning.
Morning.
New book, always with us. And since you guys did not have it until today, I read through the foreword and the preface. I'm not sure, I didn't do the introduction. It became too much for me because we do have 20 slides with just the foreword and the preface. So
Yeah.
I'm going to zip through. I really liked the foreword because it was a recap of the last book that we read. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that it was a really nice transition for us because the man who wrote the foreword, his name is, let me just, yeah, William, what'd you say? Barber.
William Barber.
And he's the North Carolina president of the NAACP, and he's also a preacher, and so he knows Liz Theoharis. Pronounce it Theoharis. And so he's talking about her a little bit, but I really liked what he said about our scripture that we read last.
He's really been a voice for the Poor People's Campaign and
Okay.
marches and stuff.
And that's your assignment, so
Well,
Poor
I've
People's
seen
Campaign.
him talk
Yeah.
at several protests, and he's kind of always out
Okay.
there.
Cool.
Is that this one?
William Barber, yeah,
We've
he's pretty amazing.
got several people ready to tell you about some of these organizations, and that I want to spend as much time as I can on that today. So I'm going to zip through these first slides just so we can kind of get a feel for the general idea of the book, and then who Liz Theoharis is. I'll pronounce it right. So this is a cool quote that is going to kind of permeate us throughout this book. Why do we worship a homeless man on Sunday and ignore one on Monday? And it's interesting that Jesus really was representative of the poor in the Bible times. Everything he said, everything he did, even the way he went through his life. You know, I don't remember him ever actually having a home of his own. You know, he didn't have a family. And so he kind of is representative of that community. And that's what our authors are trying to help us understand. So here is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. And if you go online, she actually has a really nice biography of herself in the Google if you want to. But I just did a quickie synopsis here. She's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. And then she says that she started her volunteer work with the poor when she was 16 years old. So she's been doing this for a very long time. So you can see she's the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, and several of the organizations that we're going to talk about today. She has been a director of Cairo Center, Social Justice at Theological Seminary. So this is her life's work, is working with and for the poor. And I say with very deliberately because that's one of her themes. So Mr. Barber tells us, as of 2017, we got, and so who knows what the stats are now. I didn't go look that up, but it's pretty horrendous even as of 2017. So 64 million people with less than a living wage, 54% of African Americans, 15 million children, 250 people die each year from poverty-related causes. So here's our scripture. This is the one that we just spent an entire book on. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So we spent a whole book on it, but this guy has a really nice perspective of it. Jesus puts the poor at center stage. And then Luke identifies Jesus in this scripture as the anointed one whose vocation is to engage in the work of liberation of the poor, blind, captive, and oppressed. You're going to hear the term liberation theology throughout this book, which is interesting. So I don't know how to pronounce that. Chocho means poor. And what Mr. Barber is saying that the poor are those who endure acts of violence and injustice without being able to defend themselves. That's what he defines as poor, and what that word in both the scripture that we just read and in Matthew mean to him. The poor, well, you will always have with you. And both Mr. Barber and Ms. Dr. Theoharis say that this scripture has been misinterpreted through the years. And so this is part of the theme of this book is what did Jesus mean when he say the poor you will always have with you? That seems like an inevitable, statement, but our authors are saying that it's not inevitable. So salvation in Luke 4:18 is God's initiative to bring wholeness back into the created order, to save humanity from its inhumanity. And what is the salvation from? God desires to save us from anything that oppresses us, including economic injustice and anything that works against the solidarity of the human being. And you'll see from Dr. Theoharis that she does not think that you can work for the poor without addressing injustice, economic injustice. And so that's a huge thing in this book. She grounds this book in the lived reality of the poor of the Roman Empire. That's who Jesus is talking, and then also of our times. And this is where she says, you cannot preach the good news apart from the work of doing justice. So she says, one purpose of the power of the Holy Spirit is to produce a new prophetic vision and renewal under which the church can point to a new way of community. If we can change our ways and follow the ways of God, we can defeat poverty. We will not always have the poor with us. So here is the scripture that Dr. Theoharis kind of starts with, is what does the Lord require of you? And so she takes to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. And she breaks that down for us, which I'm going to give to you later. But what she does is she talks to us about all of these different campaigns that she has been involved in and that inspired her. And I wanted to start with Paul's, but I actually did get Paul's slides on my screen here. So Paul researched Martin Luther King Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign. So I'll just go to the next slide.
Yeah, you can just leave that up for a minute.
Okay.
So the Poor People's Campaign was an initiative that was conceived by Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1968, and the purpose was to address the economic inequalities that existed in the United States between the haves and the have-nots, but also with emphasis on the Black poor as well. Up until that time, from the early 60s until 1968, they had primarily focused on civil rights and equality before the law. Now they're looking at economic rights, and at the same time, and she mentions this in the book, I think, he was concerned about the level of militarism. Of course, the war in Vietnam was still going on at that time. And, just the fact that a lot of money is spent on armaments and not on poor people, not on feeding the hungry, the kinds of things that maybe Christians ought to be a little more concerned with. And plus, Blacks have always been, well, at least in my lifetime, disproportionately represented as lower paid members of the military. So they're the ones that, the cannon fodder, basically, when we get into a conflict with someone. And so they planned a big demonstration to take place at the mall in Washington called Solidarity Day, and that was held on June 19th, 1968. Unfortunately, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated 2.5 months before, so he was not able to participate. And the gentleman with his fist raised in the foreground there is the Reverend Ralph Abernathy. He was the successor to Martin Luther King in the leadership of that movement. So this is Solidarity Day. They had 50,000 people show up on the mall in Washington. They had hoped for a lot more, but I think in the wake of King's assassination, probably there was some damage to the movement and it didn't quite get to the levels that maybe they were expecting. And RFK was also assassinated that year too. So the big feature of the Poor People's Campaign at that time was called Resurrection Cities. Go to the next slide. And so this was a tent city made with plywood and canvas that was set up in the mall, and people who were poor were invited from all over the United States to come and stay there for as long as the authorities would allow it. 3,000 people showed up. It's kind of interesting, or there were 3,000 dwellings, probably many more people than that, and it lasted a full 6 weeks before the authorities took it down. But they wanted to do this to put the problem of poverty as they described it right on the doorstep of Congress. They want Congress to see this every day when they're coming and going to do their jobs. And interesting facts about Resurrection City. It had a barber shop, it had a city hall, it had a dining tent, a daycare, and even its own zip code for the 6 weeks that it existed. Kind of interesting. So the goals and demands of the Poor People's Campaign and Resurrection City, they had an economic bill of rights. They wanted people to have guaranteed access to jobs or guaranteed income. They didn't care whether the government gave money to them or provided them with jobs. They wanted everybody to have fair wages and a place to live. Obviously, they were focused on the poverty issue. It was a multiracial movement. There were Black, white, Hispanic, Native Americans all involved. And I could go back to the previous picture if you want. You can see a number of white fists up in the air. So there were definitely white people participating in that Solidarity Day. So the impact and legacy of the Poor People's Campaign, it brought lots of attention to issues of poverty, maybe did some good as far as governmental reforms. There was an expansion of food programs, but the broader goals of having big legislation that would actually equalize the playing field with respect to work and being taken care of never really achieved that, at least in the short term. It expanded the scope of social movements and highlighted the connectedness between racial justice and economic justice, that they're really two facets of the same stone. And although Resurrection City didn't get quite all of the notoriety that was hoped for, other groups since then have used similar types of techniques, like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and most recently the pro-Palestinian encampments on college campuses. Look to this as an example and followed that to make their causes. That's important.
Oh, sorry, here's more.
Oh yeah, there's a couple more pictures of the Resurrection City.
Resurrection City.
There's a lot of pictures. They must have had some really heavy rainfall during that period of time, because some of the pictures, the camp is almost flooded out. So unfortunately, the summer weather cooperate very well, which also may have impacted how many people came.
Dr. Theoharis talks about this, not only in his words, of course, but Martin Luther King's actions in doing this. Her.
Well, and I'm not sure exactly the relationship, but it almost kind of sounds like Curios, which Nadine's going to talk about, kind of took over the Poor People's Movement.
I don't know what order we should go in. So I've got Joyce and then I've got Nadine, but maybe should we do?
Yeah, that'll work.
Will that work? Okay,
Yeah.
let's do Nadine.
Did anyone else do the National Union of?
I did a little blurb. You want me to find that one for you?
Okay, well, Poverty Initiative is a broad term that includes all of these things.
Here's the National Union of the Homeless.
Okay,
Is that what you were thinking?
yeah, but they had a 80s and 90s.
They did.
And
then
that kind of
petered out.
led to all of these other organizations.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna be kind of bouncy because I didn't.
So I can just touch on that a little bit. But when I looked up Poverty Initiative, what I found currently is that there's several universities that have big research and grant programs that are working on causes and remedies, and they're able to do a lot of research. And I don't know what happens to the research that they do, if it goes to government entities or they try to partner, but it just is a big, broad term that covers all of these different things.
So the researchers at these colleges are doing
Current,
current work and all.
yeah,
that. Oh, sure.
yeah. But then um, the national the National Union of the Homeless started out of, because in the 70s, the face of the homeless, or the face of poverty changed. And that's when homelessness became more of kind of a bigger issue. And because of economic downturns, a lot of families were losing their homes and becoming not only in poverty, but homeless. And so this national union was established in the 80s, and it was established by people that were working laborers. The middle class was really becoming more of a face of the homeless, the lower middle class or whatever. So they started their leadership out of people that had been homeless and were kind of working through these issues. And so that was part of their tenets, was that they needed the homeless to speak for themselves and kind of establish their own needs and asking for what they needed and being a part of the solution. So
yeah, that's why I put here this is their mission statement.
Yeah.
And they say about themselves, the power of the National Union of the Homeless is proof that we can speak for ourselves, think for ourselves, and organize together to lead not just ourselves, but the nation in changing the very system that continues to create homelessness every day in this country. And I think that's what Dr. Theoharis is really trying to emphasize with telling us about these organizations, and obviously being a part of them, is that we need to work with the homeless, not a charity.
Yeah.
It's a really different mindset. They can speak for themselves.
Well, they were
listen to them.
They were able to work with the Housing and Urban Development Department, and they did. Their leadership was able to get Jack Kemp to agree to build 10,000 HUD-sponsored dwellings, who then backed out on the deal. So that didn't pan out. But what they started was a take off the boards campaign. And that was a little controversial, but they basically illegally, I guess, went into houses that had been foreclosed on by the federal government and occupied them. And the governors of those cities let them do it without evicting them or arresting them or whatever. They just kind of let it happen. And then they had several cities they had ended up with units across the country. Kansas City had one in the 80s and 90s. And then they kind of fell apart in the 90s, partly because their leadership got the crack epidemic started, and that kind of was part of their demise. But they have been resurrected now in 2019 with the Poor People's March. The leaders, some 100 people came together and decided they wanted to resurrect this union. And so now have the same mission, and they're trying to address the needs now. So
Your whole thing kind of remind me about region. There, someone goes and lives in the community for a year, gets to know them, asks, "What do you need? What are the top priorities?" People get to participate in deciding what works. And outreach there help them have resources, contact things in the government of that country. But they're part of making.
and that's part of it. The government funding is so vital And in the 80s, they really cut funding. So I think HUD had a budget of, I think it said $32 billion that was cut to 7 billion. So all of these programs that, they just didn't stand a chance to maintain any kind of forward movement. So
Global health is a lot like what Sharon's talking about. We have the mission teams that can go in and actually provide services, medical services to people, but that's not a permanent solution. That's a temporary solution, 1 week out of the year or whatever. And I see more initiatives in global health that are directed at going in and training so that you have indigenous people who have the capacity to provide healthcare in their communities. Health Ministries Association is very much the same way. We pay for scholarships so that nurses and doctors can be trained in Honduras and Guatemala in hopes that someday those people would serve the community. That's the aim.
sometimes government policies, and I mean, it's obvious, do exactly the opposite of that. So like gentrification and redlining and all of those things that happened really put people who were at risk even more at risk. And so it just kind of compounds.
So I wanted to bring up again the peace colloquy that Coral and I went to. The organizations, they had this same theme that, and I'm trying to remember the exact names of each of these organizations. That's what I was trying to look up, but I think I gave away my papers. The one that's downtown, I think it's AC Project. What's it called?
City Shelter, City Shelter.
Yeah. Is it Shelter KC?
Shelter case.
Okay, Shelter KC, the gentleman in charge of that one says these exact same types of words, is that you cannot help somebody if you don't know what they need. And so rather than give the homeless person who you see on the side of the highway, he was like, definitely do not do that. Instead, find one, and I've been talking to friends about it over, some people might be more comfortable doing this than others, but I see him all the time in front of my Quick Trip. He sees them in front of his Hy-Vee, and he invites them to go into Hy-Vee with him and have a meal with him. And this is the man who's in charge of a project, so he feeds them and then gets to know them and says, why don't you go with me to this shelter?
Sounds like Jeremy.
Exactly. I mean, we saw Jeremy at Jeremy's service. That's exactly what Jeremy has done quietly in his life, and so I've been thinking, okay, I can at least give a meal and maybe stand at Quick Trip and talk to them a little bit more. I haven't done it yet, but so these are the things and at the Peace Colloquy, we had people there. These are the people who now, those same people that he has helped work at his center. Yeah. And the gentleman from Lawrence, the Taiwanese gentleman from Lawrence, you probably know him, who he is, but he brought 3 guys with him that he had helped and who now work in his shelters, so when somebody gets helped, that does affect them quite a bit and they want to help others. So that makes sense that we're talking about it, before, and they want to help themselves.
Eric sends out a newsletter every month.
Yeah.
With testimony
Good.
in it that would
Yeah.
inspire anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Here's what.
The shelters kind of started as a result of this National Union of the Homeless. They kind of were implemented the first shelters. So
Okay, meeting
Okay.
where we were.
I'm over here. So I think, I'm sorry, I was out of town much of the week, so this is probably not as in-depth as guys, but I think the Kairos Center is actually kind of a big umbrella,
Okay.
for training,
Okay.
as well, and encouraging. But the whole title for it is the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. And so it's the movement to end poverty, But again, as we said, led by poor. They're going to be the ones, so they're kind of helping find those leaders amongst and helping train them and help them be able to find. And it kind of helps to know that the word kairos is an ancient word describing a time of great change when old ways of the world are dying and new ones are struggling to be born. So it's kind of got a neat kind of foundational word. So they think, this wasn't invented recently. It's been about 20 years that they've been dealing with this. And Dr. Liz is one of the founders of it. And it comes out of that Union Seminary in New York. So it was kind of a cool now I can't find it. So they're helping to develop leaders from within the ranks of the poor, connecting them to a wide network of grassroots and religious organizations and political efforts. That's kind of their mission statement. They try to organize campaigns, mobilize things, provide educational programs, have faith gathering, arts and culture. They like 5 different prongs to their work to assist people. So so it comes out of the HU, what was that, HUN?
NUH.
Sorry. A little dyslexic there.
Same thing.
Yeah, of the 80s and 20s. Yeah, it comes out of that. This I thought was kind of interesting because it said in ancient Greek there were 2 words for time, chronos and kairos. And chronological and sequential is chrono, but kairos is proper a time for proper opportunities for action. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Overall, and they reach back to Bonhoeffer, a guy named Miles Horton. I don't know who that is, but they're trying to put in the justice to help people get out of poverty and pull it from the grassroots. Right? They want those people who are doing that. So
Right.
that's most of what I found. I'm sorry I didn't have much more time.
That's okay.
It'll take me just a minute here to see if I can't get it.
Illegal shift, 5-year penalty.
Well, you guys triggered a thought while you were talking, so why he's playing them. When my dad was assigned to the Florida and Caribbean region as a missionary, he traveled to Haiti a lot. And they would help teams that went down and did things, but he also did ministerial work. And after getting Haiti kind of set up, had national ministers, they would invite national ministers to Independence for some training, and they get here and they see all that American had, and they had nothing, and it created a lot of problems for those guys. And so the church literally came to the understanding we have to have the leaders from within, and that
That's
literally
interesting.
shifted over. So the church learned that
Yeah.
skill and started applying that. So
Don't
they
you
had
know that?
national ministers.
It
Yeah,
would be.
it was. I mean,
Yeah.
flying into Miami,
Oh,
Haiti, where they were living in huts. We had sent medicine down in a big crate. And my dad was walking in a village, and all of a sudden he saw the spray paint address. His return address to our house was the wall of somebody's hut.
oh my God.
I know, it was the craziest thing. So, but they learned, and I think Community Christ has done a really good job having national ministers, and I think that's
Set up 100 schools in
Yeah.
Haiti. I don't know what the status is now since the unrest in that country, but I know Art Smith used to talk about the large number of schools that he would visit. Church.
So, you know, it kind of has been building and growing.
Yeah, out that thing, I thought outreach international and learn. Okay, this. Okay, that's good. Yeah. Okay, Jonathan.
Well, I'm talking about the Southern Tenant Farmers, which actually precedes any of the groups we talked about.
Okay,
And,
it didn't really go in chronological order, I'm sorry.
well, we like, the last should be first, first should be last.
Okay.
It's kind of last on that list.
Yeah, I know, that's what I did.
So you have to understand about the Great Depression in the South. Cotton was basically king in the South. And it was the primary cash crop of many of the southern states. In 1930, there were 1,800,000 tenant farmers in the South. By 1935, 50% of the white farmers in that group and 77% of the black farmers in that group were landless.
Is that just because of repossession?
Well, because of we were going into the Depression, the Great Depression.
Yeah, I just wondered how they lost their farms, if it was just they couldn't pay for them.
Well,
any longer,
if they're tenants, they're actually
actually,
working for
yeah,
paying rent.
Yeah, gotcha, right.
And so they weren't able to pay that rent, but they lost farms. So I'll see forward. Okay. So you just understand the difference between the tenant farmer and the sharecropper. The tenant farmer paid for rent and had some control of the crops and the decisions that they made, not entirely. The landowner still was king, still had more control. Sharecroppers didn't own the land at all, and they simply labored in exchange for a share of the crop. 50%, but more often it was like a third of the crop that they raised. Clearly, both systems led to a landless farmers and a cycle of poverty. So here's
a surplus of 13 million bales, a whole year's crop, piled up unsold in southern warehouses. Then the New Deal stepped in, ordered every third row of the new crop plowed under. The next year increased its program to cut 40% of all cotton acreage. 990,000 men and women were let off the land. Vast sums were paid out in benefits. But some of the sharecroppers failed to receive their part of the government's benefit checks. And their protests reverberate in Washington's Department of Agriculture, where 3 officials are fired. Among them, Councilor Gardner Jackson of the AAA.
Well, one of the reasons we were fired is because Jerome Frank, Lee Pressman, and some of the rest of it tried to see to it that these sharecroppers got something approaching a square deal.
What percentage of the sharecroppers do you figure got gypped?
Well, in darn near half the cases, maybe more, the sharecroppers didn't get a nickel of the benefit payments. The landlords pocketed them all. But actually, back of it is politics. It would be political suicide to go against the planters. They're the Democrats who have the real power in the Cotton South.
Echoing across Arkansas are the first rumblings of revolt in the Southland.
But, Paul, you've been sharecropping all your life, and you ain't got a thing to show for it. We can't live on 75 cents a day. I'd like for any plant in the state to show me where we can. Let's get together. Let's get together. And let's build the Southern Tenant Farmers Union and make our country worthwhile to live in.
Headquarters of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union are set up in Memphis, just across the Mississippi River from the troubled region. As membership swells to 5 to 10 to 25,000, the cotton farmers demand of the planters written contracts, wages of $1.50 for a 10-hour day, and recognition of their right to organize. Soon, many a country road is peopled with families wandering aimlessly. some homeless because of curtailed production, others evicted by planters for joining in union activities. Then the union calls its members to unite for the cotton field's first strike.
Let them throw us in jail if they want to. We'll fill every jail in Arkansas. But get off the fields and stay off until the bosses give in.
Okay, so the Depression led to that excessive stockpile of cotton. And so Roosevelt, the New Deal, came up with this Agricultural Adjustment Administration. And the whole idea was to reduce production and thereby increase prices. And that's why in the video it talked about first year they were to plow 1/3 of every third row of cotton was supposed to be plowed under. The second year it was up to 40%. And the owners were paid a subsidy. And subsidy was supposed to be distributed to sharecroppers and tenant farmers. And in the video, it says not, less than 50% of the landowners passed that money on down. Most of them just kept it for themselves. So that was the formation that caused the little rebellion formed the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, CFU. It was established in 1934. And remember, 35 is when so many of the white and black farmers, tenant farmers, were without land. And they were after rather than 75 cents a day. And there's no stipulation on how long a day was. They just worked morning till night. They wanted $1.50 per 10-hour day. And that then caused many of the tenant farmers, that caused a rebellion among the landowners. But it's important to note that many of the tenant farmers and sharecroppers were in fact descendants of black slaves.
Jonathan, did the union have blacks in it?
Yes. It had both black and white. It was
That's kind of unusual for 1934.
well, it's a prime example. I think the reason it's brought up in the book is a prime example of where those who are poor, economically disadvantaged, got together and they tried to come up with so, and of course government set in to try to help them, and that didn't work so well. But anyhow, originally the AAA, that part of the New Deal, required large landowners to not harm or displace their sharecroppers or tenant farmers. The plan was to ensure kind of a rise in all of prosperity for all rural residents, especially farmers, and especially the land. Well, the actual results were the number of poor white and black farmers lost their jobs because either the government couldn't supervise it adequately, or for whatever reason, they changed that regulation, and they were able to freely get rid of any sharecroppers or tenant farmers that they could. And again, less than 50% of or about 50% of landowners, according to everything I've read, let that payment from the government trickle down to the actual people. Landowners organized against the STFU, and there are many stories I ran across where they would basically go out, lynch, kill, beat members of the union, and even though it continued to exist for a while, it was not effective in. So that's it. That's what I've got. I'm going to go back to you.
Yeah, thanks, yes.
Pogo used to say in the comic strip, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Yes. Okay.
once again, they had a program that they couldn't enforce.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like they tried to have a new deal
Well, it
and
was-
work it out.
it was a good plan.
Wait, how do
Oh, here. It's a good plan. The problem is, people are greedy.
Yeah.
Landowners
Well, that-
wanted to keep everything to themselves rather than letting that trickle down back to work.
That happened during COVID. The government spent billions of dollars,
Yeah.
you know, trying to put money out into the economy for business. Didn't beat it, took it.
Yeah.
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 So there were a couple of more on our lists that I just did a little blurb on them. The Kensington Welfare Rights Union, Progressive Social Justice Political Action Advocacy Group for the Poor in Philadelphia. And this one began in 1991 by 6 women. And I think this is a lot what you were talking about, Joyce, and they organized a takeover of 12 vacant HUD homes and to try to call attention to their failed housing policy. So we talked about the national. And then this one was interesting too, the National Welfare Rights Organization. I looked up this lady, the lady on the left is Johnny Tillman, and she's kind of known as one of the first, you know, African-American women advocates for this movement. And so this particular organization had 4 goals: adequate income, dignity, justice, and democratic participation. And, you know, once again, it was kind of like what Paul was saying. A lot of these organizations were just getting started. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. was a huge part of it, but when he was killed, they all stumbled a bit, you know, and so the things kind of fell apart a little bit in the 70s. So going back to Dr. Liz, I'm just going to call her Dr. Liz. I like that. It's easier. She talks about a liberationist interpretation of the Bible, which I thought that was an interesting word. Her work is guided by her desire to understand and share poor people's biblical and theological interpretation. So she's looking at the Bible through the eyes of the poor, and then to shine light on the models of organized poor people partnering with religious communities to abolish poverty. So that's these organizations that we've been talking about this morning. That is what has inspired her, and obviously she's been in charge of some of them for a while here. So she's telling us where she's coming from. So we go back to the question: why do we worship a homeless man on Sunday and ignore one on Monday? The New Testament. Go ahead.
I have a question. The previous thing.
Okay.
Okay. Did the government in the 1930s, was there any real enforcement against the southern landowners to treat the tenant farmers justly? Or did the big cotton owner landowners, that they just get away with abusing the tenant farmers? Was there real enforcement?
They really,
I can't hear you.
there was no real enforcement. Okay.
There's no real enforcement.
Yeah, because you have to keep in mind, the Southern cotton landowners
Yeah.
were Southern Democrats. They
Yeah.
controlled or elected the people who were in Congress. Therefore, they got even that guideline that the money had to be pared on down. They got that passed, removed.
These landowners were the grandchildren of Confederate soldiers
Yeah.
who owned the land. Okay. And so they already, in fact, some of those Confederate soldiers and some of them lived up into the 1940s. Some of them lived to be in their 90s, okay? So the landowners were aware of their grandpa fighting in the Civil War.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
And like-
you know,
like
that's just
Jonathan
terrible that the landowners got away with it just because they had power.
And a lot of those tenants then were the grandchildren of the slaves. So that set up a real problem with the power structure there. So we can
In
see
a lot of
why it
cases,
fell.
they'll talk about sharecropping and tenant farming as being an extension of slavery.
Yeah.
That during Reconstruction, they basically, or after the war, the South basically found a way to enslave the people who had been enslaved.
But they also had tenant farmers, a lot of them were white.
Yeah,
They were,
yeah.
they were.
For white.
Out in California, the Hispanics, same way with the.
Yeah, tenant farmers is there's just a lot of different words for slavery used over the years, isn't it? We've got serfdom, we've got tenant farmers, we've got sharecroppers. I mean, it's everything putting the landowner with all the power.
Well, nowadays they're in prison.
Yeah.
They're in prison
Yeah.
now. And we get them to do.
Oh,
labor
yeah, that was
way.
the 13th, that's what the 13th Amendment did. for
Yeah.
them. If you read anything about the 13th Amendment, the young black men were loitering on a sidewalk
Come up with
and
it.
they were taken into prison, and then they could abuse them even more for their work because they were prisoners. And
They
weren't
weren't paying at all.
Yeah, they weren't worth what the slaves were. So,
Tenant farmer sounds very legitimate, but it wasn't. With the migrant workers out west was the same thing. They would make a daily wage, but then they were obligated to buy from the owner in the owner's store that was on
Yes,
the land.
yes,
They go into debt at
yes,
the store and never be able to work off their debt then.
that's right.
More money.
Okay.
Yes, I was thinking the same.
One line in that if I own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
16
okay, so we've got a big hill to climb, for sure. So what Dr. Liz talks about is that the New Testament documents a movement of poor people who gathered around the person and teachings of Jesus to right the wrongs of their day. I like that. I like that viewpoint of the New Testament. I never really looked at the New Testament that way. So we go back to Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you? And Dr. Liz says, justice is the poor leading a movement to end poverty once and for all. Mercy is moving beyond charity to taking action and sharing fellowship alongside poor people in order to bring about shalom justice. That's our peace, that's our concept of peace, and lasting social transformation. And she says discipleship is speaking and praying to God through the collective actions and reflections of the poor and oppressed in our society, rather than through an individual relationship with Jesus Christ. That one kind of hit me hard. It's like, I think I have been in the mindset of it's important for me to create that individual relationship with Jesus Christ for myself in order to move forward. And I still think that's important. But what Dr. Liz is telling us is that this true discipleship is speaking and praying through this reflection that Jesus did. That was what Jesus did. In all of his reflections, he was reflecting about the poor and oppressed and telling us how to create the kingdom of God through that lens. That's really what Jesus was saying.
Well, it's interesting, the discussion she had too about whether Jesus chose to be homeless, chose to be poor, or whether he was just a victim of the system like so many poor homeless people are today. I personally believe he chose that path.
Okay.
No good son would leave their mother, especially if Joseph had passed on, as the legend has it. To leave your home and become homeless is different than somebody the bank takes your property.
He was
like
a presumably lucrative carpenter before he went on the road.
So and Peter the same way. I mean, Peter had a wife, Peter had a mother-in-law, according to the New Testament. You don't just leave those people behind unless they're provided for. So just like a person in a monastery today would take a vow of poverty, it's I'm doing something intentionally, which I think is what that was talking about, to embrace the sense of poverty, that I'm going to share that with those who are in poverty so that they're not alone. And to me, that's the greater message of Jesus. That's living a Christian life as opposed to preaching Christian life.
So she calls these people that are her heroes, poverty scholars. And just like what Paul was saying, they live their gospel through their conscious and collective actions. And so the interesting thing about these organizations that we've been learning about is that once people are able to pull themselves out of poverty, then they dedicate themselves, like you said, intentionally to helping others. And I see that, you know, and that's what Mr. Berger was telling us too, that they become the better advocates because they know how it felt, you know.
They know this stuff.
As a refresher, could you read Matthew 6:26-11?
Yes, I have it somewhere here.
You may have read it already, I just wasn't present.
That's where, didn't I?
There.
Poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have. Matthew 26. So what she's saying at the end here is that it's been twisted by Christians to say, well, they're always going to be with us anyway, and so poverty is inevitable. And she's saying, no, it's not.
It's almost like some people interpret that as Jesus wants it that way,
Right.
you know, so it's okay. It must be okay if Jesus said it's okay.
Yeah.
Or you're poor because God wants you.
Right.
Well, and people will use that scripture.
I mean,
That's a good Christian.
You know, but Jesus also said he's hungry,
Yeah.
he's in prison.
Yeah.
And you've done it on. Yeah. Honestly said, those two things. Help.
Yeah. That's why she says poverty is the sin, but being poor isn't. And so we get that confused sometimes in our society, you know, is that, oh, that poor person must deserve it because they're not getting a job. Go get a job. You know, I mean, how many times have we heard that? You know, it's like, well, some of them actually do have jobs. Some of them have 3 jobs.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, when you're talking about a living wage these days, they're just not able to get ahead, you know, and so they are going to need more help than what they're getting right now.
Did you know what the median price of a house listing cost in the United States is? I looked it up, $496,000.
Whoa.
That's actually lower than I was thinking it was going to be.
Well, the new houses are up in 507,000. In Hawaii, it's 975,000.
Yeah.
Even in Kansas City, our young people are not able to buy houses
Well,
like
it's
we
not
were able
right.
to 20 years ago.
But even paying apartment prices
I
are
know.
affordable.
It really is.
And the fact that Kansas's minimum wage is still the national minimum wage at $7.25.
Yeah.
Luckily, most places aren't paying minimum wage, they're paying over minimum wage, but still, why are we still at a national minimum wage of $7.20?
It's a system that is not working for our people. And so, you know, we need these organizations even more. And then at the peace colloquy, and what I think Dr. Liz is saying is that whatever these organizations need the churches to help them. Now, we are doing a lot of work with our Center of Hope, you know, but I'm struck by, you know, as people who might be able to help, what actions can we take rather than just, you know, giving our money? I mean, part of it is getting to know these people and what they need. And I don't think I'm very good at that. Go ahead.
Our church in Phoenix has a group that what they do is they zero in on the working homeless.
Okay.
People that are still homeless,
Yes.
but they've got jobs
Yes.
and they're trying.
Yes.
So we have one group there that just ministers to them.
Are they like
They take
letting them live
food,
in their
they
homes
take-
and stuff? Because
Pardon?
there was a lady at the peace colloquy that was talking about that, is that you can't get a job sometimes because you don't have an address, you don't
Permanent
have a
address,
home.
right.
And so it's just this, and so she was able to go, she met In fact, you guys are gonna meet our Mission Center, Peace and Justice Action, Director, her, Erica is her name, and she actually she was able to get her to, live on their campground, I think, for a little while, and so she was able to put the address of the campground on there and get a job from it, and so this is part of the actions that people are doing.
Well, there's, a challenge too is that for most of us, the only encounter that we have with homeless people is the one that are standing on the corner as we're sitting at the stoplight. And they're looking for a few bucks or something like that. So it's not an appropriate time to say, get in the car, I'll take you to Culver's and we'll have lunch.
No,
You have to go
yeah,
to those individuals,
right,
like the Center of Hope. That's,
Yeah.
People are going down there. Chris is going down there. Susan's going down there.
yeah,
And actually participating in their lives. And I think that's
yeah,
the challenge, is to say, well,
yeah,
giving out dollars at the street corner, while it may be helpful, what's more
Exactly.
helpful is to.
Yeah, yeah.
But
to go
that's
see it
what Eric
yourself.
tells us not to do.
I know, he tells us not to do it now.
That
But,
really,
but I do, I mean, I see them, I need to shift a little bit, because we could shift and say, okay, if we see them in front of our Quick Trips, they're all, I live in Waldo, and they are there every single day.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, Jim, I have done it a couple of times, and I need to kind of make a better habit of it, is asking them, what do you need today? I'm going in, I'll get you some food. And then I come out and give them food, and maybe I can stay in there and talk to them a little while, which I haven't done yet. It's a little nerve-wracking, it's hard,
Yeah.
I mean, we can admit that this is hard.
Well, it's a lot different being part of an organization that makes 1,000 box lunches every day and then takes them out on the street
Yeah,
to feed people.
Yeah.
As opposed to, again, throwing a couple of bucks out your window as you drive by. But you sometimes feel like, well, I gotta do something.
yeah. Well, and my sister's church is they have harvesters come and set up in their church building, and so there's different things churches can do. I just think as we go through this book, let's kind of talk about it and be inspired. I kind of like this
It's
idea.
easier for churches that are in poorer neighborhoods than it is for us.
I know, but Mr. Berger addresses that. There are things that we can do. First of all, there are things we can do to kind of look around and see that homeless are everywhere.
Yeah.
They're in our community just as much as in the
I would
downtown.
say not just.
Well,
But more invisible.
they're more invisible.
Johnson County,
There, not as
They're here. but
Johnson
we
County
need-
has homeless people,
We need to.
definitely here.
I haven't read the
More
book yet, so I don't know what her recommendations are gonna be, but I feel like there are a lot of organizations that are already out there and set up and doing things.
Mhm.
And sometimes when you're a Mission Road Community of Christ type of a place, you're looking for something that we're being called to do.
Right.
That doesn't mean you have to have a startup, start up an
No.
organization and make that
No.
happen in Prairie Village. But I think what it does invite us to do is maybe to think about volunteering for harvesters or some, people that need someone to come out and box up groceries and get them ready to be distributed by the Fourth.
Catholic Charities
Catholic
always have
Charities.
a big.
There's a lot of organizations. That's what the
They
Peace
will
Colony,
absolutely take.
and they love
Jonathan's
us.
Volunteered with
Yeah.
the one group. That I'm never happy.
Operation
All of these
Breakthrough.
organizations were thrilled at becoming to our Peace Colony to kind of get us all informed a little bit. And so I'm gonna try real hard to get our Peace and Justice minister. We have a Mission Center, Peace and Justice Action Minister, being paid by our Mission Center. So I'm gonna get her to come here, hopefully in one of our classes and help us too, so. All right, good start.